Hello and welcome. I'm Olga Hannanen, and this is Academia Experience. Today we are going on a tour to the streets of Lisbon to explore its rapidly developing coffee shop culture. Our guide and guest is Dr. Franz Buhr, a researcher at the Institute of Geography and Spatial Planning and the University of Lisbon.
So here is the timeout market, which is a market that opened in Lisbon in 2014. It used to be a regular city market, so selling fish, fruits, vegetables, and now it's more like a gourmet food court. We can see some of the chefs that have their own like tiny restaurant here. But I think it's interesting to come here in the beginning of our uh, field visit about digital nomads, because actually on the second floor of this market there is a co-working space. Yeah, we can see on the second floor there this huge space full of plants. That's the co-working space, and on the ground floor you will still have the traditional food market. I'll take you to the co-working space. That's the co-working space, and you'll see it's full of plants. I think that's one of the defining features that have place.
Franz, you studied coffee shops in Lisbon and the way digital nomads transformed coffee shops and the city. Could you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think we have to start by the fact that Portugal, Lisbon, is a city of coffee drinkers, and you can still find cafes all over the city at almost every corner. But then at some point in 2015, the two first specialty coffee shops opened up in the city. And by specialty coffee shops, we mean those places where coffee is prepared by a professionally trained barista with a professional machine, and normally there are different kinds of methods for you to drink coffee. And then the coffee that was served in these places was way more expensive than what the Portuguese crowd was used to paying for coffee, for espresso. And that was 2015. And then 5 years later, from two specialty coffee shops, Lisbon had more than 60 of them. And it was this period coincided with the period of the tourism boom in the city. So normally we would tend to assume that, okay, so these coffee shops were mostly catering to tourists. But actually, what we found is that in this period, also Lisbon became very attractive, also because of the imaginary around the city, of a touristic city, of a lifestyle city. It also became attractive to other populations, such as digital nomads, but also expatriates, in inverted commas, or foreign retirees, like more traditional kinds of lifestyle migration that were coming to Lisbon, not so much anymore still going to the rural areas or to the coastal areas, but also Lisbon was attracting a younger crowd. And digital nomads were one of these populations that were using these spaces, the coffee shops, not only because they wanted to have a coffee, but also because they wanted to work from these places. And still nowadays, you can, whenever you go by these coffee shops, you see that these places are you see all these people like sitting alone, using their laptops, but also that digital nomads sometimes organize these collective meetings, so the meetups in these coffee shops, or they, even sometimes to collaborate in terms of work as well, not only to drink coffee.
That's very interesting. You mentioned that from two, it expanded to 60 coffee shops just within 5 years. So how and where did these coffee shops appeared? Did they displace some other services, or did they take abandoned spaces in the city? Or what are the change that this coffee shop brought?
Yeah, we in the framework of a Horizon 2020 project called Smart Test, we carried out a commercial census in a few areas of a district in the city center of Lisbon called Misericórdia, and we compared this data that we generated with the commercial census that was done by the municipality in 2007, and we actually saw that the category that includes restaurants, bars, and coffee shops increased 55% in this period. So there is a clearly a foodification in a way of this district. And of course, some of these new restaurants, some of these new coffee shops, some of these new bars are occupying the spaces that were used before as grocery shops or other kinds of services. But what was very typical of Lisbon and kind of is still there if we pay attention is that there are many vacant buildings or abandoned buildings or buildings that were almost about to collapse. And yeah, so the commercial change, so these new shops, sometimes they replaced older shops, but sometimes they just um, took over spaces that were not used for years, sometimes even a decade. A village or the Green Street, it actually was it was nothing like this until before 2018. And there were a couple of neighbors who really liked plants, and they had plants all over the facade of their building. And then as the ground floor units that were previously residential units became shops or restaurants, then they realized that there was an interesting kind of decoration for the streets. So like spontaneously, they decided to put more plants all over the street, and now it's become a famous street because of that. So yeah, on the left side we have the French embassy, but on the right side it's what I usually call the digital nomad corner. You have all kinds of businesses that are very typical in terms of their consumption patterns. So you have a specialty coffee shop, you have a brunch place, you have a designer boutique, you have yeah, you name it. Now, of course, there are tourists as well, and there are some spaces where they mingle, but all year round you can see people working from these tables and organizing meetups and just like drinking beer after they leave their co-working spaces in this area, which is called Santos.
So how do local people react to this change? Is it a welcoming change? Because as you mentioned, there are some abandoned properties were actually brought back to life because of these coffee shops. Or what are the opinions of locals?
Yeah, I think the commercial change is broader. So coffee shops are part of that, and they attract a specific kind of clientele. But talking to residents, especially long-term residents in this in these neighborhoods, many of them were happy that these shops were not abandoned anymore. So this is good for safety and for the owners of the shops. Whenever the public lights are not working, they call the municipality for that to get fixed, or they clean the sidewalk. So there's more public investment also in the area. But sometimes these coffee shops and other kinds of shops, such as for instance, there are actually new grocery shops, more grocery shops now than there used to be in 2007. But these new grocery shops are usually organic or artisanal or vegan products. And we still have to consider that the city center of Lisbon is mostly inhabited by elderly population, and that this neighborhood that we studied, which is one of the three districts composing the city center, lost in this last 10 years, 25% of 26%, almost 26% of its inhabitants. But these are the inhabitants that the census registers, right? The census doesn't really capture all this transient population, such as digital nomads, such as other kinds of. And then because the long-term residents are elderly populations who sometimes do not speak other languages besides Portuguese, they face sometimes they don't understand what these shops are selling because the menus are all in English. Sometimes they don't understand the very the cultural practices. So they see lots of people working on their laptops, and they just don't. There's no interaction. One of the participants said that those foreigners living in this area or just using this area, and the long-term residents live in parallel worlds. Coffee shops became so crowded with people working from their laptops that they started creating this tiny regulation. So you cannot work on your laptop during lunch hours, or there are tables where you could never open your laptop on. So you have all sorts of, but this is pretty much in this neighborhood. If you go to the coffee shops that are in further neighborhoods, then on the contrary, they offer products for you to stay there the whole day working.
So how coffee shops can help us to understand digital nomadism and digital nomads?
Well, I think there are two ways of answering the question, because specialty coffee shops, they are a fundamental aspect of gentrification process, commercial gentrification process. So there's the famous ABC of gentrification, and A standing for art galleries, B for boutiques, and C for coffee shops. So they tend to signal some kind of change in terms of the consumption patterns of urban middle classes. This is what happened in London, for instance. This is what happened in New York, which has been documented a lot. But in Lisbon, what I argue is that the Portuguese middle class is not big enough. It's not it's not big enough, powerful enough to explain the quantity of coffee shops, and not only coffee shops that have popped up in the city recently. So it's a sector that is highly dependent on foreign clientele. That is not only tourism. That's not only composed by tourism. And in particular, when we look at the digital nomads who use these places, I think coffee shops are interesting because they are not only places for people to, like bars, or people for, they don't only serve leisure purposes, but they actually serve as meeting points for socialization, and actually when we did our field work, we realized that many of the connections that are created within the digital nomad population or community are done in these spaces. So these places, the coffee shops, they blur the spheres of work and leisure. They blur production and consumption, and it is and the kinds of friendships or acquaintances that they create in these coffee shops Sometimes they can be potentially clients. If you are a website designer, you can meet someone who's creating a startup, and then you design their website for you. So they, in a way, coffee shops are providing a material basis for these encounters to take place, and for the very work of digital nomadism to take place as well.
Well, thank you, Franz, for joining our podcast today and sharing and showing us the change in Lisbon. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Check out academia experience elsewhere.